I think the expectation ahead of time was that the United States would turn the government over to the opposition. The opposition is regarded by the United States and many countries as the uh, legitimate uh, government of Venezuela. So that would be a natural thing to do. But that's not what they said. They said the United States was going to run the country and apparently was going to do this through the rump Maduro regime, which would still be in place, but would be acting on the instructions of the United States. The president indicated there would be no U.S. troops on the ground. Not clear how we would get them to follow our direction. Maybe there would be some sort of commissioner on the ground, but lots of unclear details about this transition. And that's what worried me most, and I think many commentators, because we have experience before with overthrowing governments and then not having a good plan for how we were going to uh, run the country or how the country would be governed afterwards. And this this may be another such situation. Well, the administration is not looking at any deployment. Their vision is that they will tell the Venezuelan government what to do. And if the Venezuelan government doesn't do that, then they will strike again. And they will use that threat of a follow-on strike to ensure compliance. President Trump has been quite emphatic about not wanting to have boots on the ground in order to avoid these kinds of entanglements. I think he's trying to have it both ways with this situation in Venezuela. That is, change the regime in ways that the United States wants, but not put U.S. forces on the ground and risk getting involved in a long insurgency kind of situation. Most of the population lives in the northern tier of Venezuela, where, for example, the capital is. It would be quite possible for a new government to exert its authority where the population is, but then be unable to exert that authority in the hinterland. And in the hinterland, you have gangs, you have cartels, you have guerrillas, so that there's the possibility of a kind of failed state in the hinterland, even as the government runs the areas that are most populated. Who ends up speaking for the Venezuelan government? Is it interim President Rodriguez, or is it the head of internal security and the heads of the armed forces? Who is it that we start seeing making pronouncements about what Venezuela will do and not do? We could see a military coup or just a soft coup where the military is clearly calling the shots. We'll know that, I think, pretty quickly. And if that's the case, then the administration will be faced with a tough choice, which is to conduct another strike, another set of escalations, or accept the fact that Maduro might be gone, the Venezuelan regime might be a bit more pliable, but the goal of regime change and establishing a more friendly, democratic, successful regime would be unachievable. The president did point to his powers under Article 2. He has argued through this campaign that he is protecting the United States from invasion by cartels and drugs, and that the Constitution gives him the authority to do that. Now, it's a stretch, but it's what the administration's lawyers are arguing, and until it gets in front of the Supreme Court, all you can say is it's controversial, and even perhaps that most of the legal profession believes that this was not legally done. I think it's very unlikely that the United States would do something like this in another South American or Central American country. The administration has not established the case to do that. It hasn't positioned the forces to do that. What you could see are air and missile strikes against drug facilities in these countries. When the president talked about Colombia, he talked about the drug production facilities. The same thing in Mexico. I think both countries are very worried, not that the United States is going to invade, but that you get these missile strikes with the United States arguing that these countries can't control their own uh, territory, that they are allowing uh, drug cartels to operate either willingly or unwillingly, and that the United States has to step in for self-defense.
The most important principle of the rule of law that supports everything, I mean, the very reason we have law is to have an alternative to lawlessness and violence, for people taking matters into their own hands, using physical force to get their way. We have a neutral set of principles. We don't allow people to beat each other up to get what they want. We don't allow countries to use the equivalent violence amongst themselves to get ahead in the world. The world thrives on peace, on harmony, on a well-ordered system where treaties matter. That's why after the worst disorder of all time, the Second World War, the UN Charter was instituted. It has a core principle prohibiting the use of military force with very narrow limitations for self-defense. If an actual armed attack, military force attack happens on your territory, the kind of thing that Ukraine is fighting against Russia's invasion, or if the Security Council authorizes the force. So when Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, the Security Council authorized the whole world to liberate Kuwait. Those are the two situations that really matter. There are a few cases of consent. That was one of the justifications, partial justifications the U.S. tried to use for Panama, because there was an elected leader who said, yes, use military force. But there's limitations on consent also, and there is certainly no one in a position to consent to these attacks by the U.S. in Venezuela. President Trump ordered a major case of military force in which people have died. There's been destruction. There is great fear without any basis, justification in the law. Think about it. The U.S. has been trying since 1945 to support peace in the world through the United Nations. That's why the UN exists. But this is a slap in the face of those rules, saying that somehow President Trump gets to decide what is the right to use military force. And that is going to cause great dissension in the world. It won't help in the short run to reinstate U.S. leadership and support for international law. It's going to cause more mistrust. It's going to take many years before the U.S. can regain its sense of, or its respect as a leading rule of law and democracy. I'm afraid that President Trump has probably been misled into thinking that this action would somehow be comparable to Panama in 1989. There's been some whitewashing of that incident. Panama has had a popularly elected leader who was able to take over. Remember, Panama is a very small country. We had a large U.S. troop presence in that country. There was a popularly elected person waiting to take power, and the U.S. supported that regime change. Let's also remember that many hundreds of people died in Panama. And we never got an official death count. This was all suppressed, because it's completely unclear to me that the people of Panama could not have created a peaceful revolution and removed Noriega themselves and put him on trial themselves. So that is in many ways absolutely the wrong case for President Trump to have been thinking about when he has used this military force. As far as we know, the vice president has taken over. She's asked for signs of life. So this is just the Chavez-Maduro regime continuing, even if Maduro has been unlawfully removed from the country and may somehow at some point be facing trial in the U.S. This looks like it will not fundamentally change what's happening in Venezuela. This is not a clear triumph for democracy. It's certainly a terrible undermining of the rule of law. I don't have a lot of praise for President Xi. He has serious human rights violations on his record. His uses of force and aggression in the South China Sea are despicable. And it could be that someone who has that mindset will say, look, nothing serious is happening to the U.S. He won't see the long-term damage that this is doing, or the long-term undermining of China's own interests in taking any kind of action that would align with or be supportive of what President Trump is doing. So I can't predict how someone with his mindset will react to this. I do know in the course of history, seeing that countries who comply with international law are the successful ones, are the ones that end up being the leaders in the world, the countries that really have the moral currency to lead. And the US has not done well out of past invasions. 2003 invasion of Iraq, this is similar to that, not to Panama. And that has cost this country dearly. It's cost the world dearly. Staying on for decades in Afghanistan, long after the Taliban regime fell, that was unlawful. That has cost this country. We could go back to Vietnam. We could talk about the dirty wars of Central America, which have so undermined the stability of the region and helped produce people like Chavez and Maduro. These are if you really read history and and understand how international law can work to successfully create the world we want, or when it's ignored and violated, lead to these constant problems we have, the very problems President Trump is rightfully concerned about. Maduro is no hero. We do need to get a handle on the drug trade and the human trafficking trade around the world, in the Americas. We won't do it through violating the law. We will do it by reinstating and supporting the law, creating courts that are brave enough to stand up to lawlessness. If Maduro has good legal representation, the case will turn out, I predict, differently than that of Noriega. It will at least stretch on for a very long time and probably go to the Supreme Court. That's my best prediction. I wish the U.S. courts were more committed to understanding how international law would prohibit this kind of trial. Let's not forget, our courts have tolerated Guantanamo Bay and the illegal detention of people there for decades without any kind of trial, let alone a fair trial. So it's going to be complicated. I'll leave it at that. And the clarity in this complication is that international law does not support this kind of indictment, trial, and prosecution. And how the international community, especially those countries committed to the rule of law, to human rights, to peace, and to the United Nations Charter, how they react will be extremely important.